All right. Hello and assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for tuning into the Growth Mindset podcast. It's made by and for you to help them develop a mindset that's focused on constant development and improvement. This podcast is a project brought to you by the Islamic Society of Markham. I'm your host, Ajaja, and today we're going to be talking about the artist journey, a topic that's pretty close to my heart as an artist myself, and also a very pertinent topic today because as we're seeing in the current social and political climate, we really need to see a strong Muslim presence in media and arts. So I'm excited to welcome our guest today, Nawal Salim, who comes from our very own backyard in Markham. She has many roles that she occupies, but primarily she's an actress and a filmmaker. She's a seasoned program producer and content developer with an impressive background in arts programming, communications, and acting. She has over 10 years of experience, including a Master of Fine Arts in documentary media. She found an organization called Greenlight Production, which was a Muslim dramatic arts organization. She has acted in films and shows and commercials, and she's worked and volunteered with a lot of arts organizations, many of them Muslim, such as the Silk Road Institute, Muslim Fest, Ontario Culture Days, and the Young Center for Performing Arts. So welcome, Nawal. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm doing well. I'd love for you to begin telling us a little bit about your journey as an artist.
Yeah, that's a good question. I was thinking about it this morning and I'm like, how early do I start? Like when I was 6 or like when I started getting paid for it? Like it's up to you. I do think when I was a child, all of that is relevant, but let me know. What do you think would be helpful?
I'd love to hear about your inspiration. So you can start from when you were very young. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think when I was a child, I've always really enjoyed performing in any way, shape, or form. I don't even know if I was good at it, but I did it. So whether it was like the school choir when I was like in grade 3, or like when I was in grade 8, I used to play like the steel pans, which is it's an instrument from like the Caribbean that for some reason we had in our school. And I was a part of the band. And when I got into high school, that's when I was introduced to theater and drama. So it was never a thing in elementary school, but in high school it was. And that's when I fell in love with acting and performance art and being on stage and being in front of an audience. And I knew that that's what I wanted to do with my life. Which was quite upsetting, I think, probably for maybe my community and my family, because we don't see representation, or at least positive representation, of Muslims in the media and in storytelling. So it was quite confusing for them that that would be something I'd be passionate about.
Mhm.
But since I grew up in Markham and my high school was down the street from ISM, there were a lot of Muslims. And for me, in drama class and in the drama guild, we had hijabis playing all kinds of characters. None of them that contradicted our faith or made us do anything that we didn't feel comfortable with. So I didn't really understand why people were not accepting of this as a career choice. But I intended on doing a theater degree, but I never ended up going to theater school. I studied English and professional writing at York University. I hated it. And so that's when I started my Muslim drama club called Greenlight Productions, to kind of show people, like, guys, I think we can act and perform and create things, and it doesn't have to go against our faith. So I did that for the 4 years. Then I graduated and I had to decide if I should get a boring 9 to 5 job or if I want to continue to pursue art. So I applied to film school and theater school. Didn't get into theater school at 21 years old, but I got into film school. And then I started wearing the hijab. I'm condensing the story. And then I started wearing the hijab. I started my master's in documentary film, and then I did my thesis project on me pursuing acting while wearing a hijab. And through that film, I got an agent, and then the rest is history, or the rest we can talk about in this podcast. But that's how I kind of got started. It was a lot of no's, and I had to do a lot of convincing to people.
Yeah, definitely. And mashallah, like, I mean, people don't know, but we're friends, and I've grown up seeing you go through this process, and it was like amazing and really inspiring to see just someone succeed, like someone from our own neighborhood, who is Muslim, who's hijabi, who's woman, like actually land an agent. Like that was so
Yeah.
exciting. And I think it's so interesting. Well, two points I'll touch upon what you said, but I think it's so interesting that a lot of people look at Muslims that enter the media, and you often see like the opposite journey happening, like they enter as hijabis or they enter as like very practicing Muslims, and then you see
Yeah.
certain aspects start to fall away as they become ingrained in this like in the structure that really doesn't allow them to practice their faith, and it really pressures them to like take off their scarf or to do
Mhm.
things. And for you it was the opposite. Like you entered filmmaking and then you started wearing a hijab and then you
Yeah.
started acting and then you landed an agent. So
Yeah.
that's remarkable. And I think
Yeah.
it really shows people that you can do this and not have to compromise your faith.
Yeah.
But the other thing I wanted to ask, well, I mean, it sounds like the first degree you did it out of like a necessity, like, I need to do this to get a job, or it's a practical thing to do. And then you did do like a degree in filmmaking. Do you
Mhm.
think for those youth who are looking into getting into the arts, whether it's acting, filmmaking, like writing, do you think a degree is something that's necessary?
Yes, like I'm very pro school and pro education, but more than that, when I was doing the film degree, so to explain, I had my bachelor's degree in English and professional writing, and I did a second, well, I began a second bachelor's degree in film studies. And so it wasn't my master's right away. And when I got into this program, I obviously realized that 90% of the people there were white. And they're like small town white people. I'm like, I don't get it. I'm in Ryerson. We're in downtown Toronto. It's really multicultural. Like, why did you guys get accepted? Like, there had to have been so many more BIPOC people in the metropolitan area that applied and should have been in it. Anyways, but that really made an impact on me, in a both positive and negative way. So in the sense that because I didn't see myself being represented in my classmates, um, one, I was really frustrated. I actually didn't want to complete the degree because I didn't see people like me around me. And I felt isolated. I felt like people were kind of looking at me weird. I felt like people were annoyed every time I raised my hand and I said, "Hey, that's actually inappropriate. That's offensive. Oh, have you considered this?" And so that's actually the reason why I switched to documentary media, because I actually wanted to get out of this degree. I was actually like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be around you people that don't get me anymore. And ironically, my documentary degree was an escape from being in this environment. And so I would encourage people to go into these spaces to diversify the space so that there are more people that are like you that can be encouraged to do the same, like be that representation that other people are craving. I think it's really important. And um, I actually wanted to kind of touch on this idea of like the hijab and why I started to wear it, because when I got into my film studies degree and I didn't see any visible Muslims, especially visible Muslim women, I was like, I want to be the representation that I'm not seeing. So I started wearing the hijab because I was like, where are the hijabis? Oh, I guess I'll be the hijabi, right? And then for me, when I started wearing it, I had a moment where I said to myself, Nawal, when you wear the hijab, it's possible that you'll never act ever again in your life. And that's your passion, that's your dream, and that's your love. And that's why you're here in the first place, because you want to act and create. So when you wear this hijab, you might lose all of that. But for some divine reason, and I'm very thankful for it, I just kind of told myself, if I never get to act ever again, that's okay, because I still have God. And that's more important to me right now than acting. And then alhamdulillah, because I was so convicted in that, I was able to, through my documentary degree, get an agent like 2 years later. Like, I'm very thankful to God that he gave that to me. And I think sacrifice is really important. So like when you're in these spaces and you're around all these white people and you want to like be like them, like trust that staying true to yourself, one, is going to help others, but it's going to eventually, through Allah's like love and appreciation for you and your sacrifice, will allow you to kind of continue to do what you love, because you're not doing it for yourself and for your own selfish reasons. You're truly doing it at this point now for Allah.
Absolutely. And I think that's such an amazing point, not just for this career, but in any type of career you pursue. I think people are always thinking about the struggle between balancing, like, oh, I need to make money, I need to make a living.
Yes.
I also want to follow my passion. I also don't want to compromise my faith. But if you have your priorities straight, and first thing
Yeah.
is God, then everything else will fall into line and you will be able to do what you love in a way that is meaningful for you,
Yeah.
inshallah. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And also it's funny that because I had a similar experience in school. Like I started off studying English at U of T, and I was
Yeah.
so white. And I didn't even last a year. I was like, I'm switching, I'm going back to
Yeah.
UTSC, my Scarborough people. Like, it was very difficult to study something you love around people who had such different ideas
Yeah.
about how it should work, and it was a very jarring experience. But
Yeah.
you persevere in this field, and you've touched upon some of the challenges you face, like as a Muslim woman in this career, and I'd love for you to expand on that more. I mean, it sounds like it's a double-edged sword because you face challenges within the Muslim community and then within the
Yeah.
filmmaking, acting community as well.
Yeah. So you want me, just to give some examples of some of the things that we're about to
Yeah,
talk about?
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I first started wearing the hijab, and when I first started taking acting classes, actually, it was pre 20, I would say 2015 to 2016. So it was an interesting time because, politically speaking, also that's when Trump got elected. So there was this kind of like conversation around the importance of diversity, but I don't think people really knew how to implement it, and I don't think that they were really true to what they were claiming to want to do in these spaces. So, for me in particular, when I started taking acting classes, I had an experience where I had an acting teacher ask me if I could take off a hijab for a role.
Mhm.
Um, I understand if I walk into a space for the first time that there's a bit of confusion if you've never interacted with Muslims or hijabis. Um, and you have to ask that question. That's fair if you ask me for the first time. The problem with this teacher is that she asked me for the second time, and the second time it was more like, oh, like I understand anyone can do like anything, and that's like the thing right now, but like I really just don't imagine this character wearing a hijab. So like, do you think you can take it off? And I obviously found that very ignorant and offensive. And she was just awful in many more capacities besides me as well. So that wasn't very fun. But experiences like that were because people didn't understand the hijab, they thought it was okay to ask me to remove it, or is it really that important? Is it a costume? Like, do you have to keep it on all the time? And I don't think that they realize that like you can also just not ask, you know? And I think the most kind of difficult thing that I feel like I went through with the hijab was, and I wrote an article about it, but I took an acting class, and in this particular acting class, the teacher, who, by the way, goodbye, he's not on Earth anymore. Sorry, I know this is a Muslim podcast, but he was not a good person at all in any way, shape, or form or capacity. I also spoke to other BIPOC people. He was very offensive, very, I think, racist. But anyways, one of the things he would do was he would look at your headshot and critique it. He looked at my headshot. And that particular headshot, I wore a black hijab and a bright red apple shirt. And he looks at it and he says very kind of cleverly, "Oh, I wouldn't wear black." And I looked at him and I said, "Oh, why? Why do you think I should not wear a black hijab?" And he said, "Because their flag is black." And so I obviously knew right away he's talking about ISIS, right? Because it's like a thing that we now know because it's been so connected to us or targeted towards us. But the clever thing about that statement is all the other white people in the class didn't know what he was saying. Who's they? Their flag? Oh, okay, sure. Like he's just thinking he's taught, like they didn't get it. And so in a way, that kind of microaggression was huge. Like you just said I look like a terrorist. And so I did confront him about it. It went completely over his head. But I will say this, after 2020, things definitely changed. Obviously, since the Black Lives Matter protests, we're seeing even in institutions aside from acting and film, DEI and truth and rec and these kind of concepts. So moving forward, now I don't get questions about, can you take it off? Can you wear it differently? It's like I have the autonomy to kind of decide. And I think actually people are a little bit more respectful than I expect. Like even like, hey, can I swear around you? Like, which I was like, yeah, sure, it's your life, say whatever you want. But it's like, can I, oh, like this scene has this thing. Are you okay with that? Like all of these things, I really appreciate the kind of consideration that I didn't get post 2020. So things are looking up for
Yeah,
sure.
that's amazing, especially for young people who are looking to enter the field now and are worried about what
Yeah.
to expect. I think, you're here to tell them that it's getting better and that
Yeah.
people like you have done the work. Like, from years before, you've done
Yeah.
that, like addressing the microaggressions, like teaching, really, you're like, by being in this space, you're teaching the people who are there how to treat you and how to treat others like you who are coming into the space. So I think, we can learn a lot from people like you, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about some of your influences of like Muslims in the arts.
Oh man,
Mhm.
that's a good question. Um, the thing is, there isn't a lot of us, or at least like I didn't have a lot to look up to. Like I felt like I really had to create those spaces and places for myself. And um, I think now, again, now things are starting to open up where we have spaces that there are more of us. And the good thing is we're all kind of like emerging. So there isn't so much of a kind of, it's not as intimidating, you don't have to come up to people and like in a way perform and be like, I did this and I did this. Like we're all in this kind of space where we all just did one thing or a couple of things. And
Mhm.
because of that, we're able to kind of support one another, encourage one another, and every opportunity or in every way we can help out. It's really helpful because we all need the help.
Mhm.
Um, because really, you and I know this, like the people that we kind of could look up to were like Zarqa Nawaz, right? Like she was like the only person, or like Usman Jalaluddin, but she doesn't do film, she does writing, but she's amazing. And so I was thinking about this morning, is that as soon as we know that there is somebody who's Muslim that's making something, creating something, go support them. Like we do not have the time or the space right now to be jealous, to feel threatened, to feel like it's a competition, because there's just not enough of us.
Mhm.
And so we really have to be excited for one another, and we really have to be able to say, I have a skill set, let me be able to help. And we just have to kind of uplift and really help each other, so that one day, 5, 10 years from now, when somebody else is doing this podcast and they're like, who are your influences? They actually have someone to choose from. Because honestly, right now, I'm like, I'm just happy to be here, you know?
I
Yeah.
mean, and it sounds like the space is becoming, because there's so few of us, people like us are happy to, like, if you're a young person and you want
Yeah.
mentorship or you want to ask questions or support, like reach out, because
Yeah.
like we're looking for people to help and teach, to
Yeah.
come into this industry. So I guess that leads to like one of the questions I was curious about is like if a youth is looking into entering the space, like, and they're looking for like Muslim support, and like where should they look?
Yeah. That's a good question. Okay. So one of the things I will say is that as Muslims, in particular, as a racialized people, um, we have support systems in our allies, right? And our allies are other BIPOC people. And so, one of the things for me that was really helpful was this organization called BIPOC TV and Film, and they have a page, they have an Instagram, they also have a Facebook group. But I found that reaching out to people that weren't necessarily Muslims, but were also people of color who have the shared experience in this industry, um, are more willing to help and to give opportunities to shadow. Um, I think these are the kind of um, resources and networks that we should tap into when we're looking for, again, opportunities, mentorships, and ways to learn. So that one is like my top recommendation always when people ask, is BIPOC TV and Film. Um, then there's some like emerging spaces. So for example, MIF, which is the Muslim International Film Festival, if you're interested in getting into film and TV, that's a space where, again, once a year they do have their film festival, they'll have a networking night, but I think they're trying to expand into doing more programming that way. Um, this is also a bit more newer, but Muslim Media Hub, which is a project connected to Let the Quran Speak. Let the Quran Speak is a TV show, actually. It was on cable and now it's on YouTube. I'm not sure, it might still be on cable, but now it's on YouTube and a lot of young people work on it. I worked on it. I did an interview on it, but they bought a building, a literal building in Mississauga called the Muslim Media Hub, where they want to do workshops and be a space where people can kind of create. So if you're Muslim and you want to get into film and TV, I would suggest, yeah, MIF, um, Muslim Media Hub / Let the Quran Speak. Mosquers is in Edmonton, so you kind of have to find a way to get there, but they also have created a beautiful space to connect with also people in film and TV. And then I will also say that I worked in programming and communications, and a majority, if not all of my work was at Muslim organizations, and they weren't Muslim arts organizations. So Silk Road Institute was Muslim arts organization, and Muslim Fest was a Muslim arts organization. But if you want to be connected to something like Islamic Relief or ICNA or, like NCCM or, like Nissa Homes, like stuff like that. Like if there are Muslim organizations out there, offer your skill sets, because these organizations need a content developer, they need video makers, they need this kind of work. So that's also a really good way of practicing your craft and honing in on your skill set. And for some people, maybe like they don't want to go into film and TV, they want something that's a more 9 to 5 consistent job. And now in our kind of social media era, like there's jobs that you can do that isn't like screenwriting, filmmaking, but it's content developing or social media marketing and stuff like that, which still is in the realm of creating art.
That's really good advice. I think 2 points. One, I'll just summarize some of the advice you give. Like reaching out to allies, that's not something I'd actually thought of. I mean, there are some really good spaces, but it also helps you expand your own knowledge outside of your own community. And I think that is like a benefit to you as well. And then a lot of organizations you mentioned, I know some of them, they often provide free workshops. So definitely if you're like, keep a lookout, take advantage of those free resources that are offered. And then because, diversity and inclusion is such a big movement these days, even, organizations like the Canadian Race Relations Foundations or grant funding organizations are often looking to fund projects that are from marginalized communities. So if you have an idea and you can just, develop a grant, and apply for an idea to be able to do it. And then, working for Muslim organizations who really need these skill sets is a huge, big thing because it's very much needed. And I think also Muslim organizations are coming around to the realization that they need it. So they're looking for you if you are looking for that work. So inshallah, that would be a very good avenue to find that. I also wanted to ask about some of the misconceptions that people see or think about either the industry in general. So whether it's a Muslim community that had misconceptions about the industry or about like people who have misconceptions about Muslims in the industry.
I think one of the misconceptions that Muslims have about the industry is this idea of you're going to be put in a compromising situation. And I touched on it before earlier in this podcast. Like, I don't think that you'll ever be in a situation like that. And it's also like, if you think logically about it, you're never going to have a gun put to your head to tell you to do something you don't feel comfortable with, right? We have enough, like, that's now a question more of your own mental strength and where your moral values lie, where you feel like, oh my God, if I don't get this opportunity, I'll never be an actress again. So fine, I'll just do this. Like, I think it's more about your own personal strength that allows you to say, it does not matter what you offer me, no amount of money, no amount of exposure. I know what my values are and I know what's important to me. I can say no. But again, like, I don't feel like I've ever been in a position that's been compromising. So that's something that I think is a really big misconception. I think one of the things too is that oftentimes the Muslim community, we are also an immigrant community, and our parents immigrated here so that we can have a better life, so we can have good jobs. And I think the fear is, if my child goes into the arts, they're going to be poor and homeless and whatever the situation is. I think that the key is, if you're dedicating your time to this career path, you will get a job out of it, right? If you are doing it part-time, of course, you're going to get these opportunities sporadically. And if you look at the sporadic paychecks, you're like, oh my God, I only made whatever, $500 part-time doing this work. I don't think I can sustain it full-time. But there's things called unions, right? Like, if you want to go into filmmaking and you want to be a cinematographer, a gaffer, a sound person, like, if you can do this work full time, and that is a type of job. I worked in arts admin. That's a 9 to 5 job. I get salaries, I get vacation pays. Granted, it's not a job at RBC where I get to earn 80K or whatever that privilege is. But you're not going to be you're not going to be completely broke. But also I will also say, with the cost of living, even if you have a six-figure job, you're going to be struggling. And so something I'm even teaching myself is that if I'm going to be struggling with a high-paying job, or if I'm going to be struggling with a low-paying job, but I actually love what I do, I think you should prioritize what you love doing, because life is short. 8 hours of your day is a long time to waste. You wasted doing something that you love.
Mhm.
And then alternatively, I want to say the industry and their expectations of Muslims. I think it's just also about like, I think this is what I mean about encouraging people in the community to create more and support them. I think people who are not Muslim think that our lives are a certain way, that our day to day looks a certain way, that our coming of age looks a certain way, our hobbies are a certain way. And I think that only we can really tell people, like, yeah, do you know I can be a CIA agent? Do you know I could even be a tattoo artist? If I have a past life, don't be a tattoo artist. This is a please don't do that. It's wrong. But like there are options for roles that we can play that I don't think that non-Muslims understand is a part of. I can be a firefighter, right? Like I don't always have to be the best friend, the nurse, or the doctor, but there is a breadth of things that Muslims in real life are doing. And so I think what the industry doesn't really understand is that level of creativity of like, I can also be a vampire hunter, or like I can be an exorcism type of person. Like these are all things that is available in our acting arsenal, and that I recognize that like they're not going to know because they don't live our life. And so that's why it's really important for us to make this work, to write this work, and to do work that's adjacent to this. So for example, I'm just going to say a really quick example. Alia Yusuf did the Sisters Project. And one of the things that I loved about that was like there were all these women that were doing jobs that you don't see in on screen or in stories, and you're like, oh, you're a NASCAR driver? Like that's a role. That's a role I can play in a film one day. And so um documentary is really important, right? Documentary photography and films, because it's like our lives are so much more than you understand. And so I do see it though right now, like even the roles that I get, I'm like, oh, I want to play like something like cool and different, and like you don't know that because you haven't lived our lives. And so that's why it's so much more important for us to do it, because we can be like, no, I have a cousin that like is like an Olympic swimmer, like I can play this as an acting role. So um yeah, I think the misconceptions from that is there's a gap in the storytelling that they just don't know. Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, you touched upon this in this answer, but throughout the podcast, we've touched upon this, which is that, it's important for Muslims to be in this industry. But do you want to talk a little bit more about why it's so important that Muslims are in this industry?
Yeah. Uh representation matters, such a corny thing. We're gonna have to put it on a sweatshirt at this point. But it matters because you know so much of what we understand about people is through either our interactions or the stories that we hear, right? And I think we're so used to our own bubble that we think that people know who we are, but I don't think we realize until we're in spaces with, again, like honestly white people, and they're like, "Oh, you can't do this," or "Oh, you do this." And I think that storytelling is such a beautiful way of connecting with audiences that don't know about you, don't know how you exist, that think you're um an extremist, or you're this or you're that. And so I think it's really important to populate spaces and stories with Muslims, because once people start to understand that we're a fabric of our society, of our nation, of our communities, that we're not these foreign bodies that live over there that are dying, that are causing terrorism and trauma, where we're actually here and we're going to the movies and we have friendships, and once they start to see us, unfortunately, once they start to see us as humans, when situations become dire, when they become political, when they actually become serious, they're going to be like, wait, no, I saw a movie and there was a billion Muslims in these films and none of them were doing these things. I'm starting to think that there's a discrepancy here. And so, not to sound dramatic, but sometimes storytelling is life or death, right?
Mm,
It's the connection of the heart, it's the connection of empathy. And when things get to a point where it becomes dire, we need empathy, right? It's empathy that drives us to say stop. Like we can't let this happen to this group of people because they're important. They're a part of our society. They're our friends. They're one of us, and like you can't get away with this. And so I know the implications are so large, and we don't feel that way when we're doing the small work, but I think that's really ultimately the power of stories. It's if you can't see people or meet them, but you can hear stories about them, you're gonna feel connected to them. And when you feel connected to people, you wanna love them and you wanna protect them. And I think ultimately we can aim to create a world where we can love and protect one another. And allow for, the sanctity of life and justice. And I think a huge gap of it is the way that we tell stories about people and we say that they're not worth protecting. And so yeah, and we're worth
Absolutely.
protecting.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
was very poignant. I think it's so easy to dehumanize when you don't know or make the effort to know someone, and
yeah,
knowing someone involves hearing stories about them. So
yeah.
absolutely, and I'd love to end off on that note. But before I do, I was wondering if there was any like one piece of advice that you would leave to a young Muslim today who wants to enter this industry, what would you tell them?
Oh, what a big job. Um, yeah, I don't know, I'm being so careful with my words because I wanna be impactful. Um, I think it's really important for you to do what you love. I think we just live in a society that thinks that that's not a virtue, that nothing good can come out of it, that it's selfish, but I think that I think to care about something is a virtue, and I think that we shouldn't feel shame about it because it might not earn as much as our counterparts, right? Like for me, one of the biggest things was a level of shame that the people around me had these high paying jobs, or am I disappointing my parents if I don't earn enough? And um, is what I'm doing selfish or is it silly? And it's not silly and it's important, and your life is important and how you spend your hours is important, and you deserve to be alive and feel good and feel like there's a reason to do things besides making money, because that's just not life. Life isn't just making money and surviving, but it's believing in something and it's expressing yourself and it's connecting with others. And I think that art allows you to do that in a way more so than any job at the bank, which I'm sure is really important, or any other, typical job that you think is going to give you. Like I think expression is just as important, and we need that in our life and in our society. And so please don't be afraid, and it's valid if that's something you're passionate about and want to get into. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Noel. That was really beautiful. I feel like we could talk about this forever,
I know.
but they'll get mad at me if I make this 2 hours long. So I will cut it short, but I know like people can find you on social media if they want to hear more. You have a documentary that you've done through your MFA thesis. I'll put this all in the description for
Yeah.
anyone who's interested in learning more. But just thank you so much for sharing your time, your expertise, your whole like life story, and all of your advice with us. I think a lot of young folks and the community at large will really benefit from hearing, everything you've said, and myself included. So to everyone who's watching, please do follow us on Instagram and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can find us at Islamic Society of Markham. We stream every other Saturday, and you can also find all of the recorded episodes on YouTube. So yeah, see you in a couple of weeks. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and thank you so much, Noel.
No worries. Assalamu alaikum, everyone.